we don't know how difficult that is. Because contrary to the popular belief, the male is sexually most active in his late adolescence, not in his 20s and 30s. And that single fact is loaded with trouble. Since we must deal with males in a realistic way, we must therefore handle this explosive sex drive in his teens. The average boy who is too young for approved sex experience, in marriage that is bursting with sexual energy, naturally breaks the rules. Of course, that's what makes it so interesting, since Kinsey finds that a boy reaches his peak of sex life between 17 and 18, that is, his greatest drive. When we announce talks on sex, we always say, children under 18 not admitted. The boy of 18 stands at the door and bangs, let me in, I'm at my peak, let me in. What most influences your sex life? In women, two major things. One, when were you born? If you were born before 1900, then you have a different influence and a different outlook and practice in your sex life than if you were born in the decade after 1910, 1920. After World War I, there were many influences in American life to change one's sex attitudes. The impact of Sigmund Freud, the effect of war on sex, the intermingling of classes, the problem of prostitution, one's attitude towards petting and premarital coitus. By the way, coitus also means intercourse. The attitude towards petting and premarital coitus is certainly more relaxed if you were born after 1900 than if you were brought up before 1900. The second important factor is how religious are you? If you are a devout Jew or Christian, then you have more taboos than those who are not so devout. Most of our sex codes are derived from the old Jewish Talmud, which prohibits any sex activity which do not promote procreation. What is the sin of Onan? It is not masturbation, as most people think. It's called the sin of onanism. It's not masturbation at all. Onan was a man who had to have sex relations with his brother's wife when his brother died to increase the birth rate. But Onan spilled his seed upon the ground, and Onan was stoned to death. And the old Jewish Talmud says that any sex activity, masturbation, homosexuality, any activity that does not increase reproduction or help procreation is wrong and sinful. Religious women are therefore less likely to have premarital relations or extramarital relations, but once they start, it has been found that they continue along at the same pace as everybody else. Now, by premarital, I mean sex activity before marriage, premarital. By extramarital, I mean sex activity with others after marriage. That is, extracurricular activities. With men, the thing that influences your sex life most is the educational class to which you were born. If you have gone as far as grade school or high school or college, then your attitudes towards sex, when you start and what particular activities and outlets you have, will be different if you're a grade school graduate, a high school graduate, or a college graduate. With women, this makes no difference at all, since women of all educational classes have been found to be pretty much alike. That is, no major differences. How widespread is petting? American youths, ladies and gentlemen, ask more questions and seek information on petting than perhaps any other aspects of sex. The great problem as parents and teachers is how to advise them. How far shall you pet? Shall you pet? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? How far shall you go? First, let us see what is going on, shall we? By 15 years of age, or the second year high school, 39% of the girls say that they've petted. By the time they're 18, 81% of them have had experience, on the average of once a week. Among single American women, it's the most popular of all kinds of sex activity. The boys start petting around 13 years of age, the girls at 15 and 16. Notice, please, the girls seem to mature sexually earlier, but this does not mean that they have the ability to respond earlier, too. The boys mature later, but start earlier in their activity. 99% of all girls who were born after 1900 pet. 91% of those who were born before 1900 pet. The question, of course, is what is petting? Where does petting begin and pregnancy end? You see. Now, a girl may say, I gave birth, but all I did was pet. It depends, of course, on your definition. It can range from simple kissing, hugging, and general bodily contact to those deep kissing, tonsil exchange affairs. And even genital and breast contacts. Of course, once a girl has had coitus, she accepts all of these petting techniques more readily. Petting apparently turns out to be a very old indoor sport. And it dates back to ancient history and is not an invention of Americans at all. Kinsey says that most girls first learn to understand heterosexual experience. Let me define the term. Heterosexual means with the opposite sex. Homosexual means with the same sex. Kinsey says that most girls first learn to understand heterosexual experience through petting, not through their mothers, not through their teachers, not through their biology classes, but through petting, where they get their first initial contacts. This introduces a girl to far more than just orgasm. It introduces her to the problems of adjusting to another person and slowly learning sexual techniques. After all, how do you learn anything? In gradual steps. Even sex must be learned. It isn't something... You see, with a dog, you don't have to teach a dog a thing. The dog knows, it's instinctive. But a human being, a great deal of it is learned. It seems that the most satisfying petting is carried to the point of orgasm. Not intercourse, but to point of orgasm. And if not, one of the great disadvantages of petting is that it does provoke a great deal of nervous upset and inability to concentrate. The person becomes bodily aroused, and it's only natural that if you keep building the body up to a point and then leave it there, that it's going to remain upset and congested, which of course is what happens. Let's look at this problem. How many men and women have premarital intercourse? That is, intercourse before they are married. In our society, we say only intercourse in marriage is right and approved. And anybody who does otherwise is sinful, illegal, and if he gets caught, God help him. This is our attitude. What are the facts, however? Notice, please, the laws are that, the teaching is that, the clergymen preach that, but what are the facts? The facts are that nature creates a very strong sex drive in the individual that reaches maturity at a very early age. Between 12 and 15, you become sexually mature. But nobody gets married between 12 and 15. Although, you see, nature never knew about marriage to begin with. Nature never heard of marriage. Because if it did, it would be another story. It would make you sexually active at the point where you're ready to be married. Nature is interested in one thing: increase the race. Because if nature heard of marriage, then nobody could become pregnant unless they were married. But you know, it's perfectly possible to become pregnant without being married. Did you know that? Well, I'm glad you came tonight, I'll tell you that. And if nature had heard about marriage first as a prerequisite, then every sperm cell, before it would travel 1 inch, would say, let's see the license, please, let's see the license. Is this trip necessary? So you see, our nature on one hand creates a strong drive. The law, on the other hand, sets up prohibitions, taboos, and naturally, we're going to have great, strong conflicts. The drive between desire and the law. And anyone who can solve the problem of integrating the demands, the sex demands of the individual on one hand and the law on the other will go down in history as a saint. I'm working on it. I like the sound of the word Saint Banks, you say. With all the teachings, with all the laws, with all the taboos, with all the religion, and with all the fear, what is really taking place? 50% of the women in the Kinsey sample experienced coitus in the year or two before they were married. A great portion of them, of course, confined it to their fiancés. But 50% of all women had sex activity 1 to 2 years before they were married. Of the girls who married by the time they were 20, 50% had premarital intercourse. By the time they're 26 to 30 years of age, 40 to 60% had premarital intercourse. With how many men did they have affairs? Of those who did, 53% had intercourse with only one man before marriage, 34% with 2 to 5 partners, 13% with 6 or more. I think I know that 13% very well, you know. If this shocks you, then remember this: it doesn't begin to compare what the male figures are. Because 90% of men have sex intercourse before marriage. If you were born before 1900, your generation had less than half the number of premarital affairs than the generation born 10 years later. At this rate, this continues. By the year 1964, there will be no more virgins left in America. That is not a recommendation, it's only a fact I'm pointing out. The double standard is beginning to turn into a single standard.